Hello and welcome to No Wrong Choices. Along with Larry Shea and Tushar Saxena, I am Larry Samuels. This is a podcast about the adventures of life, where each episode we invite somebody to join us who is a dreamer or a visionary, meaning they had an idea or a passion that they chased after and ultimately made it to where they were going, or they're on their way. This week we're talking to Crystal Berger, who's a former media personality and tech entrepreneur who has literally been breaking down barriers her entire life. Tushar, I know you've been friends with Crystal for years. I don't think there's a better person to set up this conversation than you.
Thanks, Lair. When I think of CB, one word comes to mind: courage. She is one of the most courageous people I know, and not because she's jumped from one industry to another, which, you know, she started out as a teacher and then jumped to the media industry, which to me is crazy. I've never ever understood how someone could make that kind of a leap, but I guess you do. But not just that, but to then go from the media industry into the tech industry without any real tech experience, that is crazy to me. And like, I've known CB for, like a decade or more. We've worked together for so many years. She's one of my dearest friends. I am super lucky to know this woman. I'll say this: the tech industry is not known to be the most welcoming place for women, for people of color, and she's both, right? So it's kind of that double whammy that she's really got to walk up a hill to succeed in this industry. And I know she will, for the simple reason that she is determined. And we talk about the notion of the journey in progress. Her journey is definitely in progress. So this is going to be kind of a unique little one-off story for us here. And trust me when I say this, it's an inspiring story. There's a reason why CB inspires. It's because of her personal story. I mean, I tell everybody, she is the most inspiring person I know. Guys, I know you, after this interview, we're going to say the same thing. An inspiring person.
Yeah, I think, when we interview people on this show, there's personal challenges, professional challenges. I think, Tushar, what you're talking about with courageousness is really important to touch on here, because it's very easy to stay in a comfortable situation, personally, professionally. When you're chasing your dreams, you really have to take that leap of faith. You really have to decide that being comfortable is okay, but it's not going to help you accomplish your dreams. And you really have to take that leap of faith. And not all of us find it an easy thing to do. And Crystal, in just researching and looking at her career and her life and the obstacles that she's overcome, you really see that she was all about moving on to something bigger and better. And she didn't stay in that comfort zone, which I think is important when you're chasing after the big prize, So yeah, I think courageousness is really the word of the day when we talk about Crystal Berger.
Yeah, and it's a great conversation, and I'll end on, she talks about facing a lot of challenges that I'll never understand, and there's no way that I would. So with that, here is Crystal Berger. Crystal is a media industry veteran who has worked as an on-air host and producer for Fox. She's been a contributor to SiriusXM and many other platforms, and in addition to being a good friend of Tushar, Crystal is exactly the type of person we like to talk to on this show. She's somebody who is a dreamer, has passion and vision, has put herself out there to create a new business. And these are the types of people we like to be inspired by. So, Crystal, thank you so much for joining us.
Larry and Tushar and Larry, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
CB, gentlemen, pardon me if I continue to call her CB rather than Crystal. I've known her for a long time.
Is that what we should do too? Are we calling her CB?
You are not allowed.
Hopefully we'll get there by the end of the interview. We haven't earned it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to vet you guys first. Listen.
Exactly. Fair enough. Right. CB, I've known you for a long time. Obviously far longer than these two guys have. And I've told as many people as I can that you are one of the most inspiring people that I know. I think I've actually told that to your face, that you are one of the most inspiring people I know. And while it's great to have your backstory, and obviously we'll get into that in a minute, I want to know about what you're doing now, because what you're doing now to me is unbelievably inspiring. Because not only have you when you made the jump into media, and I've been in media my entire life, my entire working career has been in radio, it's been in television, it continues to this day. But what you have done is essentially say you had a very thriving media career, and you said, I have to make a change. That, to me, is courageous, beyond belief courageous. So I think, to start, why don't you tell us what you're doing now?
For sure, Tushar. And I am one of those people. I used to be a high school English teacher, so I live by acronyms. And so one of my favorite acronyms is FEAR, right? False evidence appearing real, and I knew that a lot of the risks associated with taking the entrepreneurial journey were more things and conversations that I was having in my mind about what does this lack, unquote, of stability look like. And so for me, leaving the newsroom really meant that I wanted to be able to affect change in a more tangible and scalable way that I felt I couldn't do at the network. And like I know, and I'm sure the gentleman here as well, since everyone has a dynamic media story, when you're working for an engine, you don't have the freedom of creative control as much as you would like. You may have to ask for a lot of approval to bring certain conversations to the table and or perspectives to the table. And I kind of hit that, that wall that we would talk about more oftentimes than not on our car rides, Tushar, where I knew that in order for me to be, CB inspires, right, I would need to do something more. And so today I am a tech founder of a media tech company. And so I'm building a product to essentially streamline some operational inefficiencies that I observed from working at the network so that we could have more impact creating stories, and that those stories would be more diverse and more colorful, and at the end of the day, just really change the fabric of the conversations that we hear consistently in the media.
So you really took like a left-hand turn, essentially, and that's a leap of faith, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of, I think a lot of people, fortune favors the bold, of course, but a lot of people are afraid to make that huge move that's vastly different than what they're doing, which I think T was touching upon. What was the courage? I don't know, necessity? What was that thing that forced you to make that left-hand turn?
So there are a couple of things that are there, Larry. It's funny you say faith, because Tushar knows I will throw a Bible scripture at you all day, every day. And so one of my favorite scriptures is, no thing is impossible with God. And so for me, faith has always driven my experiences. Even as Tushar mentioned, I didn't come from, I didn't work my way up to network media. I really took a leap of faith and kind of negotiated my way into a network. I had never worked full time at any station. I was only an intern for like 6 months at a local station in Baltimore. And so faith has always been a driving factor in everything that I do. But to answer the second part of your question, for me, Larry, it's one of those things where I'll give you an example. I remember having a conversation with human resources at one point where they were basically not willing to give me a title change that I rightfully deserved. I saw the position and the work that I was doing, and I looked online and saw what that title should be. And I remember sitting in HR, and the woman said to me, well, you're not a producer. And I said, ma'am, are you crazy? What are you talking about? I have a national podcast and news feature that I host, book, and do the production for. I'm cutting sound. I'm doing that on a regular basis. And then I'm also producing content, finding subject matter experts for all of our local affiliates nationwide, on top of picking the stories that they're talking about and giving them talking points. But I'm not a producer. I'm confused.
If that ain't a producer, I don't know what is.
And
those are producer things.
Correct. And it was almost like I was having an outer body experience, because I just couldn't believe what the person was saying to me. And in that moment, though I did get the title change that I ultimately deserved, it took a lot of advocacy that I felt was unnecessary, because I was actually doing the work and I was yielding results. From the time I walked into the newsroom, I was able to triple our booking numbers, right? And so it's like, well, how am I having a conversation with someone about the work that I'm actually doing, because they're benefiting from the work? And so to get to the question you asked, Larry, is that I just knew in that moment that at some point I would have to leave sooner than later.
All right, so I'll step away from where we are currently. I want to talk a little bit about your backstory a little bit. And you said a moment ago, right? You did not start your career in media, right? That was not the first job you ever had. The first job you had was you were a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point during your teaching career did you say, you know what, I want to move a little bit further. I want to try and, let's say, broaden my platform and step into media? And why?
For sure. So this is the thing, Tushar. I had a dream as early as 15. It was a show that used to come on BET called Teen Summit, and a woman named Ananda Lewis used to host the show, and she was basically talking about the issues that young people face. And this is when like NWA was out, and all this crazy stuff was happening in hip hop. And I remember watching her at 15 and saying, "Oh my God, that's what I want to do with my life." I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't come from a family of journalists or even in a community where journalists were like around the corner, but I knew I wanted to do that. So that was my childhood dream. But life and circumstances, I remember in college, I had got offered an internship going into my junior year, and I couldn't take the internship. It was at a local ABC affiliate in Baltimore. I couldn't take it because I had to work that summer, right? So, when we talk about barriers to entry in media, I didn't have anyone that could pay for me to do the internship, and, I couldn't afford not to work that summer.
Right. Yep.
So, all that to say, I always had it in my heart. It was a dream of mine, but I just didn't know how to attain it. And so when I was teaching, I remember being in the classroom. I was a 9th grade English teacher in Washington, D.C. And so I was 21 and they were like 16. So it was like, I was like their big sister. But I remember the impact and the influence of, on-air personalities and the role that they played in the decision-making of my students, like anyone who had some level of celebrity or influence or impact on the culture, like they wanted to hear more about that. Like I used to have to teach subject verb agreement over like Jay-Z lyrics, but it was effective, right? Like it really resonated with them. So it made me an effective teacher, but I knew that the pivot was going to be necessary because again, in the classroom, I was in the nation's capital, but like, what was it? 64% of my students read between the 3rd and the 6th grade. I was a 9th grade English teacher.
Wow.
And so I remember like fighting with my principal. Like one, I didn't have textbooks the first 3 months of school. So I'm an English teacher copying handoffs so they could learn, and then when I the first homework assignment, and this is a tangent I'm about to go on, but the first homework assignment I gave them was The Most Dangerous Game. We were about to read that story. And I said, guys, go home, write me a paragraph about the most dangerous game you've ever played, outline the rules of the game and why you considered the game dangerous. And this was like an assessment. I wanted to see how well they could write.
Right.
And guys, when I got those paragraphs back and could barely read them because the syntax was off, there were no periods at the end of sentences. It made my heart cry, like I was like, what is happening, and I knew that I wanted to have a public voice to really illuminate these things, and it wouldn't be able to occur in the classroom.
So where did that take you? So you had that vision, you had that inspiration. What was the next step you took?
I jumped out of that window and landed in Houston, Texas, and I went I went to Houston, Texas. I thought that I was going to go to law school and impact change in that way, but I never dreamt of being an attorney, right? Like I never really wanted to do that. And so I did my first year and a half, and then I ended up leaving, and I came back to the District of Columbia, that area. And one day I was taking a business planning and development class, just randomly, guys. And a good friend of mine, Armenian guy named Dave Zake, I always accredit him to my journalism start. He was starting an online publication called Scene Baltimore, and it was a lifestyle publication. So he runs in one day and he's like, Crystal, and Tushar knows, anybody who knows me, it was like CB, right? It was, it was CB. He's like, CB, I have some interviews tonight with some of the Baltimore Ravens. I need somebody to go do it. I don't know who else to do. He's like, can you just go? I said, absolutely. I was like, I'm young and they're rich and why not,
Sounds like a good time.
Sounds like a great time, But the craziest part about it, and again, Tushar knows this story. I walk in, guys, my very first ever interview was with Ray Lewis.
Wow.
Super Bowl MVP, right? That interview actually ended up getting like 80,000 views on YouTube. And then all of the other Ravens started to call me to like moderate or host like their charity events and things like that. And so it just opened up the floodgates. And my best girlfriend, Monica, she came to one event that Terrell Suggs was hosting. And I was doing some pieces for the event. And Monica said, she said, CB, she said, I don't know what you've been doing, but this is what you need to be doing, and at that moment I made a decision to pursue my journalism career seriously at that point.
It's interesting. You talk about breaks and how things happen. There are some parallels between the story that you just told and my story. I come from a middle-class background in Buffalo, and it wasn't the end of the world, but it wasn't easy, and I had to work, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember when I was an intern at NBC Sports, I was given this incredible opportunity to go work for the Olympics in Barcelona back in whatever year it was, but I couldn't go because I had to go deliver pizza. I had to go home and do what I had to do to pay for my next semester of tuition. So there's some interesting parallels there. But when you break in and you get that door open, which happened to me really in my early 30s when I really got into broadcasting. Once I got that bug and got in the door, it was difficult to get me out. And if you fast forward 20 years later, we're sitting here having this conversation. So the bug is still there. So clearly you had that passion, you had that energy, you had that drive. Where did you go next? What was that next step for you?
Yeah, so the next step was I was trying to get an internship. Crazy thing, right? But like you just mentioned, Larry, right? I'm older now. I'm no longer in college. They're only giving internships for college credit. So I found a local broadcasting school called the Broadcasting Institute of Maryland. They're no longer around, right? Robin Quivers went there, Howard Stern's co-host, right? She went there, and some other folks it's like a trade school. Found them, enrolled in BIM, right? Enrolled in BIM. Yep. And so this is my schedule. I literally was running my business in the daytime, right? Because some of those athletes I converted to PR clients. I would go to BIM midday, and I ended up interning at WJZ, where Oprah was, right? Not at the time when I was there, but that's where she started her career, right? I ended up interning at WJZ at night in their sports department with Mark Viviano, because that's the only department that stayed open cutting tape, right? And open late, that late in the day. So, for me, that was the pivot, right? That was the pivotal moment where I knew that, I had to be in school in order to get the internship, in order to get the experience, and ultimately make the connections that I needed to make. And so that's what I did for about 6 months. And then I just started going crazy. I'm one of those people that you can't tell no at any point, right? Especially when you get to that point in your journey where you're like, it's now or never. And so I just started to apply to like all of these stations across the nation, and about 100 actually. But then I made a decision like, well, I'm not going to go to a small market. Like, I'm older, I'm in my late 20s. I was like, let me just make sure that I get to a top market. So it was only New York, LA, and Chicago. And I think I hounded the people at Fox so much to let me in the door that they just broke and were like, just come on, girl. Just come in.
To get rid of you, they invited you in.
It's so funny though that you say that though, because you have to shoot for the top, right? Because somebody gets those jobs, right? And if you're afraid to shoot for whatever that dream is, then you're never going to get it. So I'm fascinated with your story. So you did seek out the broadcasting training early on, so that gave you the confidence to kick down those doors and to go and ask, be willing to do anything to get where you wanted to go. So again, we have a same situation where we have a lightning strike moment, right? You got your big break, Ray Lewis, and then you prepared yourself and started kicking down doors. Did I get all that right?
you got it right. And that's the thing though, right? Like I know the learning curve was so significant, right? Because I went to a national network. It's not like I went to like even a local New York station. I went to a network. And so I remember coming into work so early, and we have a colleague that, well, he was former colleague now for me, but he used to say, one thing you do know, when you get here, Crystal Berger is going to be sitting in that seat. And I think people just thought that I was there because I'm like, just this really excellent person and I wanted to be to work early. But I was coming in early because I needed to Google, like, what is this thing? What's happening in Tehran right now? Where is that on the map? And so I used to do all of this extra work, and I would come in like an hour early for a 4:30 in the morning shift just because I needed to catch up.
I'm going to ask a question that I ask a lot of what I would say minorities in the industry. That as a black woman, or as a black person, and then as a black woman, did you find that you had to work harder to get into the industry?
I think Black women specifically have to work harder, period, right? You know, my aunties have this saying, and God rest all of their souls at this point, but they say, your ice has got to be colder. You know, there's a unique perception that Black women are all strong, and, you know, that Black women may be difficult. And so I think that it's less about, well, you still have to do more than your blonde haired, blue eyed, you know, 2-pound female counterparts, right? You just do, right? Because there's something about your presence that can make people uncomfortable. And whatever that thing is in them that they need to deal with, that's not my issue. But I do know that though you are perceived as superwoman, right? And because the perception that a Black woman is going to come in and save everybody, right? Or be the mammy or the help, right? I think that you take on additional roles and additional work just to prove that you're worthy to be in the spaces where a lot of your peers, meaning other women, you know, your age that are not Black, they don't have to do the same level of work. And I think that's consistent amongst any and every industry. It's like if you guys were to Google it, right? Like Black women are the most degreed people on the planet. Like you'll meet a Black woman, she has 15 PhDs, and it's like, for what? You know, you teach high school, you know, and it's that kind of thing. And it's just a reality. And so, you know, I never perceived it as something that would bitter me. I just knew that it was a part of just society and where we are. And more oftentimes than not, you know, you'll look at the salaries of a Black woman, right? And she's usually paid less. And I experienced that. It's like me being in HR, right? Talking to them about my title and the work that I do. And so I do believe that there's just a perception that a Black woman is going to be superwoman and have all of these superpowers and do everything. And she does not have room to fail. So yes, to answer your question.
So what were some of the major obstacles that you had to overcome? Aside from financial, obviously.
Right. I think that there is a dualism that has to take place, right, with Black people and Black women, specifically in corporate America. Meaning, I used to always joke and say, you know, my white colleagues or counterparts, they only have to know what Friends, like the show Friends, like you only have to know what Friends is, right? I have to know about Friends and Martin. I don't know how deep you guys are into pop culture, but like Martin is like, you know, the Black version of Friends. And so you have to know multiple things, right? You have to know both sides of the equation. Like you have to be Black, but then you have to be corporate, right? And then if corporate doesn't look diverse, like our newsroom didn't, you know, then you have to like do this thing where I think the other piece of it, to not go too far off on a tangent, I think to dispel the perceptions and stereotypes of Black women, like, you know, people expect a Black woman to be quote unquote angry. So I think I would be overly nice, right? Or in times when I would want to wear like my hair natural and curly, I would choose not to. So I would spend an extra 2 to 3 hours straightening my hair so I could be more, you know, acceptable or palatable, right, to our consumer. And so those are the kinds of things that, you know, a lot of Black women deal with silently. I never had imposter syndrome, that, you know, this term they use a lot today, because I come from a very strong foundation and I know who I am as a woman, and I was never trying to be white, you know, in that respect. But I think that the imposter syndrome shows up in a way where it's like you do still feel like you have to be overly qualified and overly prepared to be in the room. And I did not hear or see that from, again, you know, my other female colleagues, that I felt like they would just show up and be like okay with who they were. And I felt like I could not make a mistake.
Did that experience inspire you to go off and do your own thing and start your company?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think one of the main things is, you know, being in the newsroom more oftentimes than not, especially working as a booking producer, I was bringing in diverse perspectives, right? And it wasn't because I was consciously seeking out diverse perspectives per se, but it was like, I know this qualified attorney that could come and talk about the Bill Cosby case, and he happens to be Black, right? Why are we not using him? So I was always bringing in people from my Rolodex that my colleagues didn't have in theirs, right? And so what prompted me from that experience to start my own business was, it was like, hey, well, what happens when I'm no longer in the room, right? Because the thing about it is, and Tushar knows this, a lot of folks that I was bringing into the room had dynamic stories, were
Yeah.
qualified to be on air,
Yep.
but no one had access to them, right? And I get it. Like, our communities and our phone books look like our communities at home, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, and so
Absolutely,
if that person isn't in your phone or in your network or isn't, you know, a part of your alumni association, you don't really know where to find them, right? And it takes more work to find them because, you know, in the news business, when you need somebody right now, you just need somebody right now. So you default to who you know that can deliver.
Yeah.
And so for me, that process of bringing that diversity onto the platform, I thought about it like, what happens when you're no longer in the seat? And so that really made me decide to create some technology that really addresses efficiency, but ultimately it removes the friction so that we can actually have a more equitable conversations as well.
Got it. So just as a quick reset, can you give us your elevator pitch, so to speak, on what the you'll see that I am a business person because that's part of my vernacular.
Yes.
Can you give us the elevator pitch for what the company is?
Absolutely. So EBO is an on-demand API that connects subject matter experts to content creation platforms like podcasts, local radio and TV, and even networks. And we also tackle the friction that is created because of the inefficiency. And we tackle that DEI challenge that most corporations face when they're looking for diverse perspectives and content creators for whether it be a conference or a employee resource group meeting. So our API is what you could use to actually not only find those people, because we find them, vet them, and we connect you to them.
All right, so I kind of want to get back to what we were talking about just a moment ago about this notion of having to overcome obstacles, right? So obviously you've had to overcome obstacles within your journey, your media journey. Tech is notorious for not being a diverse community, right? Let alone minorities. It's not diverse gender-wise. But as a Black person, as a Black woman entering the tech field, what are some of the current obstacles you're facing now?
Well, you know, Tushar, you know I like going from the pan to the fire, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're not trying to go the easy route, that's for sure.
No, but I think it's less about obstacles and it's more about opportunities. You know, I like to reshape that because what I've always been able to do, guys, is actually use, you know, who I am to my benefit, right? And if I need to be your diversity quota, then that's fine. I'll take your money so you can meet your diversity numbers. That's fine with me. And you know, on the funding side of things. But I think that, you know, I think again, it goes back to your ice has to be colder, meaning one thing that I've started to realize, and I have an amazing legal team that I'm working with, and they're one of the biggest tech legal, you know, they do a lot of tech deals, right? I think they did Peloton and a couple other ones. And my attorney, you know, my counsel, she just kind of said to me, Crystal, I just don't understand why it's so hard for you to raise capital. She's like, you know, you have a product, you know, you have your resume, like I can actually Google you, you know, you're doing something where you can prove and validate every single use case. And she was like, you know, most of the white guys I deal with, you know, when they come in, they have like a piece of paper and they got $1 million from, you know, someone who sits on their dad's board, you know? And so again, it's about the access, you know, you look at 2021 was a historic year for founders raising capital. I know you guys have been reading all the stories like, oh my God, VC, everything is VC. Yep. And I think in the first 2 quarters of 2021, $147 billion was raised by tech companies or startups. I believe it's 1.8% only went to Black founders. And when we talk about Black founders, we're talking about not just African American, right? I'm sure that Africans are in the fold, Afro-Latinas or Latinos are in that fold. And so, you know, 1.8% is nothing, you know? And then you add the element of being a woman. And I believe, and you guys can look the number up, but I believe the number of women, Black women who raised capital was only 0.8%, right?
I'm not surprised it's that high.
And then the craziest part about this though, guys, like statistically, I wish I had my sheet in front of me, but they say that Black women are 33% more likely to yield an investor a return on their investment than any other founder.
Because of the barriers in front of you. You've got to work harder.
Correct. And so for me, it just has been like dealing with the insanity, right? Of like, dude, like you bet on me, like you're going to be 33% more likely to get a return than anybody else. So what are you considering, And so I think it's like just looking at some of the systemic perception of, it's all about, and I love what you guys are doing on your show, because these kinds of conversations will help people think about how they perceive the world, right? Yep. And I understand that we are all just products of our own experience. So if you have never had a conversation with a Black woman, you don't know that she's thinking about, do I have to straighten my hair today? Right?
No, you're right. So, there is no perspective or limited perspective.
Correct. And then when there's no perspective, there's no empathy, right? Yep. And then there's no change to be affected because you don't feel anything stirring your spirit to impact this, right? And so I just, for me, obstacles look so different for everybody, but I have been blessed to align with some amazing non-Black people who totally believe in my vision and have been putting resources behind me. And I'm very thankful for that, because I know that I need, the white guys who I'm doing deals with to be in rooms advocating for me and my product, right? I need them to open up the doors to the decision makers at these big media companies where they already have relationships, right? Instead of me having to start fully from scratch, because when you're starting from scratch and you don't have any access, you don't have anyone, sharing your name in rooms when you're not present, it just makes the journey so much harder, right? And you're less likely to beat the systemic issues, because by the time you get there, you're so damn burnt out. You're like, well, look, I might just go ahead and just, go off the grid for a while because you've had to do so much to get there. So, obstacles have been opportunities for me to have these kinds of conversations and also to just show up in an amazing way.
These are great conversations, and we're so glad we're having it with you. I know if I had $1 million in my bank account, I would have written you a check already. I just want you to know that right off the bat. So,
yes, Larry, yes.
This is a show about a journey and about doors that needed to be opened and obstacles that needed to be overcome. What would you say to young people today, young people of color who are going to face these obstacles, and how they can overcome them, and what would be the best advice you could give them to make their dreams come true?
You don't have to get ready if you stay ready. One thing for me is that I know that it's very difficult for people to tell me no because I'm ready. Like, I have my numbers, I've done my due diligence. I don't expect anything without having already done the work. And so I just believe that when opportunity does land in your lap, it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, when you can actually take the actual internship, right? You can actually go to the Olympics. It's like, if you can be as ready as you possibly can for opportunity, then it's very rare that it will slip through your hands. I think that as someone of color, a Black woman specifically, I think a lot of times the being ready is a challenge because of the lack of resources that you may have, where your counterparts can actually not have to worry about having money saved to actually get on the plane, to take the business trip, to have the meeting that turns into a deal, right? So, trying to have like your savings in place, and, or maybe you just got to, work an extra few hours and put money aside for your dream. Make sure that you're doing the research. Make sure that you're building a strong network. And so I would just say, you don't have to get ready if you stay ready, because the thing is, when you are ready, there's nothing that can stop you from achieving your dream.
Make sure you make friends with someone who can drive you into the office at 5 in the morning.
That is your role, Tushar. Everybody has a role and a purpose and a place.
Hey, CB, would you consider yourself right now successful? More success is obviously coming, but would you consider yourself at this point successful?
It took a long time for me to say yes to that, and it wasn't until I recently, guys, I did go off the grid, and I went to the Dominican Republic for a month because I needed to just really clear my head and just really see where I was taking my life. And I remember writing down a list, right? And it was supposed to be a list of 10 accomplishments, right, that I had made over my 10-year stay in news and in network news. And when I finished, I had a list of 53 things, and
wow,
just accomplishments. And I read this list, guys, and, it was like I was a social media ambassador for the United Nations. I won a Freedom Fighters Award for the NAACP for my work in journalism. I hosted a national news feature that aired in 1,300 homes and on Sirius XM. And, and I just was reading through this list, and I was like, Crystal, you actually did it.
CB inspires.
CB inspires, So But success, I really like for people to know what success means to them. Because we live in a society that just paints this picture of likes and, how many people liked your post and things like that. And they equate other people's actions to their level of personal gratification and fulfillment. And I think that is just such a dangerous place to be, because you'll never have any peace because you're looking for validation outside of what you can do.
Yep.
For me, success is being a good person. Success is maintaining your integrity to where no matter where you go in this life, no one can say anything bad about you. For me, success is to be able to help the next young, Crystal Berger or, Christopher Berger, out there in the world, and to give them hope that no matter what you perceive as 15 years old, this dream that you had, like, you can make it happen. And so I do feel like I'm a success today. And I believe that, as long as we are good people, good people, and I have to say that just one more time, just being like a good person, then you're a success, and a lot of this other stuff is just so, intangible, and it doesn't even really matter in the grand scheme of life. So
you're so very right. It's so easy to get caught up in the wrong things, lose your identity, get attached to the chase and the pursuit and all those other things. Caught up in the
minutia,
and to get caught up in all the wrong things rather than the right things. So, Crystal, it sounds like you have things figured out, and I think many of us are empathetic, or not empathetic. That's not the word. Jealous, envious, whatever it may be. You're a very inspiring person. So thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Yes, fellas, it's been great. And just keep doing the work that you're doing, and I think that that's critical, right? I just spoke with an investor at a venture fund, and I said, man, just do the work, put your money where your mouth is, bring along founders that might not look like your portfolio, and, just do your part. And I think you guys are doing your part. So I just appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that we inspire somebody today.
Look, if somebody's not inspired by CB, they're not doing the right thing. They're not doing the right thing. Hey, CB, before we kind of wrap up with you, if folks want to get in touch with you, or get to know more about you, what's the best way to do it?
Go to cbinspires.com.
Or just talk to me. You can always call me. Yes, I'll tell you.
That's right. He'll tell you guys. He knows all my stories.
Do we get to call you CB now?
I think you guys have done it. I think you guys earned it. You guys earned it. I am officially CB to Larry. Look, wait a minute, to L squared. That's what you guys are to me. L squared.
So, guys, I think we can call this interview a success.
Yes.
Thanks,
CB,
Crystal.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was great being here today.
What an incredible conversation. Tushar, thank you so much for introducing us to Crystal. I really don't know where to go, meaning the challenges that she's had to overcome, as a business person, there are so many things that she pointed out in terms of the challenges that she faces as a person of color when it comes to raising money, to connecting with people that are hard, that, I just never really thought about. So, Tushar, thank you so much for introducing us to her.
Thank her for coming on, and thank you guys for having this conversation. The one thing that always struck me about this conversation that we had was the one thing I've always enjoyed about Crystal is her openness and her honesty. And that is really what I think came through in this interview, just how open and honest she was. And it allowed us to be very honest about asking some, not easy questions. I'm always very fond of asking difficult questions because it causes you to think. And I like it when we have to have a conversation that makes us all think. And this is one of those types of conversations.
Yeah, I got a lot out of this. What an amazing person. What an inspirational story. You talk about a work in progress. I mean, we're all kind of a work in progress, right? But when you look at the chances that she's taken in her life and the twists and the turns and courageousness, I'm going to go back to it because I think it's really, really important for our listeners out there to understand that you could stay on the same path and you'll just keep getting the same things. And what Crystal was able to do is literally truncate that part of her life and start complete new ones and be successful at it. So sky's the limit for her, right? I mean, all the adversity and obstacles in the world, but every single one of them she just seems to overcome and surmount. And it's really an inspirational story and a cool story. And what a great person. You could just feel it, you know?
Absolutely. CB Inspires.
Check out cbinspires.com. I guess my last observation will be, it felt like we didn't come anywhere close to getting the whole story. There are many other layers to this onion, so to speak. And I know that she has suggested that she would come back and visit us again, and hopefully she will indeed do that. So our thanks go out to Crystal. Our thanks also go out to you for joining this episode of No Wrong Choices. We post about once a week, so please follow us here or on Twitter and Instagram at the Fellas NWC. No Wrong Choices can also be found on Facebook and the web at www.nowrongchoices.com.